With data about the Omicron SARS-CoV-2 virus variant indicating that number one, the severity of illness that it can cause is actually milder, and number two, that the degree of immune escape, even though real, is significantly less than it was feared to be. I think it's reasonable for us to ask ourselves the following question. Is this variant confirming anxieties and fears that scientists and the population at large have entertained regarding viral evolution? Or is it indication of something else? I'm Dr. Gili. On this channel, I try to help you make sense of health information and news like this during this pandemic. And let's delve into it. First of all, I want to very briefly touch on the Omicron virus origins. We have had discussions on this channel about this. I have made a video not too long ago about Geert van den Bosch's manifesto and his prediction that as we vaccinate more and more people, we're going to see the emergence of more virulent, more aggressive, more dangerous virus variants. And when Omicron came on the scene, a lot of people have jumped from that camp to the conclusion that here it is, we told you so. Even though, notably and importantly, Geert himself has not gone that far. So I think that's worth noting. But more importantly, if you look in the scientific literature and the reports in the media coming from that, there are articles out there that throw out all kinds of suppositions. This one in particular from Science goes into this genetic tracing of its origins. And what they are saying is that there could be a scenario where this virus did not originate in South Africa recently, but it has been mutating itself in the general population all along since the mid-2020, some people even postulate, until it became Omicron. That's fine, except for the fact that there has been extensive testing all over the world, and we haven't seen it doing that. So because of that, a significant body of researchers are going to an alternative hypothesis, and that is, what if this virus actually mutated itself in a population of non-human hosts? We know, for example, that in some parts of the US, 80% of white-tailed deer test positive for SARS-CoV-2, meaning that they had this infection, and we know that it crosses from humans to such mammals, and it can come back. So what they are postulating is that perhaps in that reservoir, in that animal reservoir, you had all this virus circulating and spreading with no vaccination barriers, with no treatments. And here we are, it made it back to the human population somewhere, somehow, in the form of Omicron, which to me sounds more like a realistic hypothesis. But regardless how it emerged and where and how it made it into the human population, what we know from preliminary data, and I want to stress this very, very much, this is preliminary data and it can change over time. But so far what I've seen is very solid. Last night I posted a video about the immune escape. Even though based on the sheer number of mutations and their location, the models predicted a significant level of immune escape. And while we see some of that, it's not as severe to completely destroy vaccine protection. In fact, it looks like the protection is still there to a good extent, especially if somebody had both the disease and the vaccination. And so that's good news. And that goes against this narrative that this virus, especially as we vaccinate more people, is going to escape immunity, is going to kill left and right and become ever so more aggressive. We don't really see that. Also, very importantly, the data coming from South Africa, the doctors that are treating patients there admitted to the hospital with Omicron, they are not seeing a lot of ICU admissions, a lot of deaths. In fact, their reports seem to indicate that what we see clinically is in vaccinated people a very mild case of a cold-like disease, and in unvaccinated people a similar condition, but the symptoms are significantly more intense. But again, not to the point where they get so sick that they have to be put on a respirator or treated in the ICU. How much more transmissible is Omicron? You know, the guys at John Hopkins, for example, in this article, they are discussing this issue and indicating that based on initial reports, it seems that Omicron may be more transmissible than the Delta variant. We don't know yet. But if that's the case, we may see a scenario unfolding over the next few months where this virus may push out the Delta variant, which actually may not be such a bad thing if you think about the disease itself, the severity of the disease being milder and Delta being more severe. This would actually not be a bad thing at all. If one starts from a doom and gloom evolutionary paradigm in modeling future variants and how they will fare in the human population, we see all these gloomy scenarios where ever more transmissible, ever more virulent, ever more mutated variants come along, and we better watch out, right? Because they'll be causing more and more destruction and death. At least that's what Gert van den Bosch's scenario predicted. However, if you go from a blank page, I'm not even saying non-evolutionary, just blank page or historical precedent, if we look at how the influenza virus changed over time after that pandemic 100-some years ago, what we actually see is as mutations accumulate in these viruses, as they spread in the population, in the human and animal reservoir, and more mutations accumulate, the vast majority of those mutations are either neutral, meaning they don't do much at all in terms of affecting the virus fitness and efficacy to infect and to cause disease. A good portion of them, though, are near neutral but slightly deleterious, meaning that they affect the fitness, but on an individual basis, each of those mutations has such a small negative effect that it's imperceptible. You can't tell. However, as more and more mutations accumulate and build up in the viral genome over time, what you end up seeing eventually is that the virus fitness starts to gradually and slightly drop from variant to variant, from year to year, to the point that eventually you can see some of these viruses go extinct or variants go extinct. And indeed, not too long ago, in fact, just before Omicron took on the scene, the rapid drop of COVID-19 in Japan, who experienced a huge Delta spike not too long ago, made some scientists speculate and think that the Delta variant, as this article here suggests, the Delta variant may have mutated itself into extinction, meaning, again, that it accumulating so many mutations as it went through the population there, that it eventually mutated itself to where it could not produce infection any longer. And so if this last scenario that I'm more a fan of will play out, what is likely to happen is that we will gradually and hopefully soon progress from a pandemic with severe disease to an endemic where the virus will circulate in the population. New variants will pop up here and there seasonally or otherwise. But these variants will be generally weaker in terms of the severity of the disease, at least, than the original or the previous variants. And in parallel, as the population gets vaccinated and goes through the infection and builds immunity and herd immunity in more places in the world, this virus will have less and less ability to spread like fire, and therefore we will move out of this pandemic. Again, I hope sooner rather than later. So anyways, that's how I see things right now. Again, this is based on preliminary data, but I think the assumptions that I'm making here are more realistic because they are based on historical precedent and they are not biased by this doom and gloom evolutionary way of thinking. Curious to see what you think about this. Till next time, you stay healthy.